Hi everyone. Today we are going to start discussing about Spring Boot with Web MVC. Spring Boot with a Web MVC we are going to discuss. See, before going to learn the concepts of Web MVC using the Spring Boot, we should have some knowledge of Java web application. We have already discussed about servlets JSP, and we developed some of the examples also. CRUD applications we already completed, right? Using web application level also in servlets and JSP level also, we have completed that MVC approach and all. So we are already good at web application, but today we are implementing the same thing with a Spring Boot web MVC. Okay. See, so what are the prerequisites and all? We already completed few things in a Spring also, but only in a Spring core. How can we develop the basic applications using that Spring core module, and the different types of configurations we have seen. XML configuration is an annotation like a Java configurations we have seen, and some auto wiring concepts. All these things and connecting with the database from the Spring core application. How can we perform that database operations with a JDBC template and all the things we have already completed. So now in a Spring Web MVC, just like here the basics, we should already good at the basic things. For database connection, anyway, we use a JDBC. In web application level, I'm discussing about a web application level, JDBC. Next one is a servlets and JSP we used. Of course, server also for deployment we used, that is a Tomcat. We use that Tomcat server. And next one for creating the web pages, HTML also we used. HTML. So normally in a normal web application, what will happen? Here, this is the client system. First of all, let me explain about the static pages that we can create with the HTML. You can create with the HTML, right? Static web pages. Static pages means what? The content is the same for every user. Just a simple example, it's a login form I'm creating. Login form. This one, enter the username and enter the password. Suppose password, and one button is a login button, as we are taking like this. This page is common for every user, and we are developing these pages using HTML concept. Now, one user entered the details, username and password, and some password entered. Who will collect that request? Whenever we click on this login, whenever we click on this login, here it is that server side program. Server side program. It's a server. Simply to say servlet. Servlet. It acts as a controller in MVC, but later I'll explain. But remember, in the web application, in web development level, directly we select the servlet file. Directly we select the servlet file. It is also class only. But whenever you collect that servlet, is automatically it will come up with the two methods, do get and do post. Depends on the request type. We will write the logic in either do get method or do post method. As we know already servlets concept. So what a servlet program is responsible for? It is taking the request. So collect the input. Next one, it will process the input. After processing the input, it will generate output. That output is nothing but view. That view, we can call it as a JSP. So using that JSP, we can create dynamic web pages. Dynamic web pages means what? The content is not common for every user. The content will change from user to user. For example, Facebook application. If I log in, right, my page details only will appear. So for different users, different output will come. For example, here only, how the output will be welcome, suppose username, and some information about that user. It's a dynamic page. You cannot create the dynamic pages using HTML. We create with the help of JSP only. Here it is in between who will take the request and who will process the request, and finally who will generate that view, output, response. Is nothing but servlet, is a controller. But in the more simple way, if you want to tell, it's a Java class. That's all. Because here we select that servlet, but in a Spring Boot, in a Spring Web MVC level, we are just taking one class only, normal class only, but we make that class acts as a controller by using one annotation, like a controller annotation. We just make the class acts as a controller. Okay. So this is what just with our knowledge, right? How can we develop the web application? We know already. We know. Next one is in MVC. In MVC, simply, so what is M? As we know, it's a model. Model means what? Just with our core knowledge, simply to say it's a Pojo class. What is the purpose of Pojo class? Representing an object. Information representing an object. Data is nothing but object, or it's a collection of objects. It's a collection of objects. That model is exactly representing the table. Suppose, just an example I'm writing. If it is a account class which contains account number, account holder name, and is a balance in account. Of course, the model class means what? We will define getters and setters anyway. And this model is exactly represents the table in the database. Exactly represents the table in database. So that first one is a number, is integer. Name is a string, there it's a varchar. Balance is a double, there it is a decimal. One model class is representing that the table, simply to say record. Suppose one object, consider. If you create object for that account, if you store the details, account number is account holder name, suppose a balance. So that will become a record here. That will become record. Number is 101, name and balance. So model class is always represents data, object or record, collection of objects, anything we can say. Second one is a view. So what is that? View. V equals to view, that is. As a view means what? So what is the result? We are present. We are giving that present to the end user. End user, right? A view means what? Either it is a submit form to get the information and as well as output form also. Nothing but resultant form also. Everything we can say that view. Next one is a C, is a controller. Is a controller. We already discussed now, right? It is a class that will take the request, that will take the request. After that, it will process the request. And after that, it will generate the response. It will generate the response. This one. It is a class. Simply to say servlet in web application development, a controller is nothing but a servlet. But we already discussed that here, class. This is the one. Okay. Now, let me explain about that request. In how many ways? In how many ways we can collect the request? From the user, we can collect the request generally in a three ways. One is directly they will give the URL. Next one is a simply they will use a hyperlink. Third one is a simply they will give the information through form submission. Through form submission they will give. Suppose if you want to open that Gmail, if you open that Gmail, how you will open? Simply you will type www.gmail.com. Suppose if it is already open, if you want to open inbox, /inbox you will give. /inbox you will give. Directly it will fetch the information. That is. Next one is a hyperlinks are there. Suppose already if you open the Gmail, suppose here number of options are there. Number of options, something like a compose, inbox. Just consider, generally I'm writing, is a sent, drafts. Suppose here it is, menu of items are there, menu of items. If you want to open the inbox, if you just click on this hyperlink, so that is also is used to send a request. The third one is what? Form submission is another request. Same is a login page only. We already discussed. Suppose enter username, enter password. Not only this one, even fetching the details also is a login. Login. Whenever you click on this one, it's a submit button. Submit. It can be sometimes a get request or it can be sometimes a post request also. Here it is login. Insert the data means what? Is a post request. Getting the details means what? Is a get request. So in how many ways? In a how many ways we can fetch the information? That we need to understand. Okay, in MVC, what is M? Model, simply to say data. That model class, simply to say the Peugeot class, is the representation of object, nothing but table. Table. Each object represents a record in the database table. View means what? So what you are going to present to the end user, user interface. Controller, a class that will take the request and process the request. Finally, generate the response. Okay. Right. So now I'm going to explain about architecture. So what is the exact flow? How application will run, MVC application. So as usual, the request always from the user. Request always from the end user for anything, either for posting the information or from the getting or from to get the information. End user always request, but end user always request from the client system. From the client system. Sir, what is that client? What is that client system? We can also call it as a web client. That system with a web browser. With a web browser, that is. So from the web browser, they can request a very, very important one. Requests always in how many formats? We have already discussed in a URL format. In a URL format, they will give. For example, if you want to save the employee details, or if you want to fetch the employee details, right? Is anything, suppose employee management system, that employee details, you just want to save. Employee details, you just want to save. That is a which request? It's a normally a post request. But here it is exactly what will happen in the web server. Exactly what will happen in the web server. We'll see here. The first thing is, whenever you are giving the request to the web browser, this is the request you are giving to the web browser. Which request? Suppose here it is a saving means what? Post request. Getting the information means what? Is a get request. That you will mention anyway. Let us take if it is a save. If it is a save, simply to say it's a post request. Is a post request. Suppose if it is a fetch, this generally I'm writing, is a get request. Sir, who will take the request? Directly any controller here, just like in a normal MVC? No. Here, there is a dispatcher servlet. There is a dispatcher servlet. This one. We can also call it as front controller. We can call it as front controller. Dispatcher servlet or front controller. Any name you can use. Any name you can use. But sir, why? Why is a front controller? So what it will dispatch actually? Normally in application, so many controllers are there. So many controllers. Normally for every module, suppose if you take one e-commerce application, e-commerce application we are taking, right? First of all, is whenever we are opening that one, search is there. Whenever you are searching for the products, search controller is important. Search controller. After searching that item, is we need to get the item that will be added to what? It's a basket, for example, consider, right? What all the things we will purchase. Suppose Flipkart is there, right? All the things will be added to the cart, simply to say basket. So it's a cart. That is also one controller, right? Everything added to the controller. Finally, we reach it to the payment gateway. That payment is also is one controller. right? After that payment controller, yes, payment is a success or fail. Okay. Now, so when that order will deliver, when that order will deliver, that you need to track now is a tracking. Tracking is also one control. Okay. So whenever you are developing the application based on the size of your application, so many controllers are there. We can call it as a modules. For each module, a separate controller is there. But based on your request, based on your request, which controller should execute? Suppose this is a controller, consider. For four are there, four controllers are there. Simply, this is one controller. Controller. So what controller contains? Controller is nothing but what? Class, which contains a method, because method only has logic for processing the request. Request to say servlet, but remember that here in Spring Boot MVC, we are just taking the class, we just make the controller. Okay, that you will understand only when you see the code. Now, the dispatcher servlet has to dispatch the corresponding controller based on the request, but not directly, because which request is belongs to which controller, that is also important. For that, it will maintain one more thing, each controller details of controllers, details of controllers. Here it is. This is called handler mapping. Exactly, it will map to that particular controller. Based on the request, it will fetch the information from the handler mapping, the corresponding controller information it will get. Then what a dispatcher servlet will do? Dispatcher servlet will connect to this one. It will request that controller. Front controller, dispatcher controller directly will not release the controller. First, it will connect with the handler mapping. Handler mapping is having the details of all controllers. All controllers. This one. Here, just let me explain how the handler mapping concept will be with one simple example. How it will be. Normally, handler mapping is a simply to say, with our knowledge, we can say that it's a dictionary. How the mapping will be? Mapping simply is a dictionary, like it's a key value pairs, just like a JSON object. So any word you can use, a combination of key value pair. Here it is. So what is that key and what is the value? What is the key and what is the value? Key is URL path actually. URL path. I mean, URL only contains what is that path of the resource. Resource path. And that second one is which method? Get method, post method. The type of request also important. And what is the value? Value is nothing but a class. A class definitely contains that method, na? Contains that method. Let me show you few examples and you will get clarity. It's the same only. Best example. that employee details only if you want to save. In the application, path resource is employee. In that employee, you have to save. Save. Whenever you are using that save, and not only that, what type of request it is? Post request. Because you are saving the data. You know already when to use get and when to use a post. It's a post request. Okay. Then what is the class? Is an employee details, na? So we use employee controller. We use a employee controller. Okay. And so what is that method? Is a save employee or save record or save details? We are using like this. Normally mapping. How? How the mapping will be? How the mapping will be like this. Just mapping is a key value pair. Key means, sir, why here we are taking in the form of this path and post like this means what? Request always will come in the form of URL only. URL from HTML directly you cannot call class and you cannot call method. Simply everything they will tell in the form of URL only. So according to the given URL, what is the controller we are using? What is the controller we are using? And what is the method we are using? We need to understand. So that is we need to map. We need to map. This is how we need to perform that mapping. And after completion of this one, here just I have explained how it will be. So after getting that details from that handler mapping, then it will release the controller. That controller will come directly. That controller will come. And what that controller will do? What controller will do? Controller always process the information. Process the information. That process the information. Data is nothing but what? Model. Data is what? Model. It will process this one. How it will process and all I'll tell. So once the data processing completes, then again it will send the request back to the dispatcher servlet. My work is done. My work is done. Just it is released one controller. Controller complete the process. Process means working with the data means what? Model. Model. But how it will? After processing, okay, different controllers with different views, na? It will give that view name. It will return that view name. So what is the view? You have to release. What is the view? You have to release. That information, it will pass to this front controller. Then what front controller will do? Front controller again will take the help of view resolver. It will take the help of view resolver. Again, what is this view resolver? Again, number of views are there, na? Which one it has to? It has to show to the end user. Again, it will give the request to the view resolver. What is the view? What is the view? Here, view resolver contains two things. One is a again prefix. Prefix means exactly where is the location of the view. Next one is a suffix. Suffix means what? Extension. Let me explain. It can be a HTML file. It can be a JSP file. Anything. Suppose if it is returning that view name, just generally It can return only, suppose it has to generate something like a inbox, consider inbox, right? Dot, directly it will not tell HTML, or directly it will not tell JSP. We will not give the information directly here by the controller. Why? Because if you give directly that type, the type of the view, the type of the view become dependent. If you give HTML, always we use a HTML only. If you give JSP, always we use a JSP only. No, you can use any UI, maybe a HTML file, or maybe a JSP file, or maybe any other file, React file, Angular file, Vue.js file, anything, no problem. So please don't give the extension. Just only view name you please give. Extension, they will mention in the view resolver. Mention in the view resolver. Then what front controller will do? Based on this getting that information, based on that getting information, finally it will give the view. Nothing but it will release that view. View is a user interface. View is a user interface. But user interface has to display the details now. But where are the details? The details it will collect from where? Model. Model only contains data, na? Suppose if you are giving that employee ID and requesting for employee name and employee salary or other details, where are the other details? Where are the other details? Everything with the model only. We know that according to that servlet's knowledge, their MVC knowledge, what controller will do? Suppose it is connecting with the database with the request, fetching the information from the database, all the details will set to the model object only now. Because in model object only variables are there, data is there. Data is there, right? So in the view, to get that information and to display the information, we are using expression language. Expression language. So what is that expression language? JSP. In JSP, expression language is there. Or sometimes we can use HTML also. But here HTML you can't use. Theme leaf concept is there. Using the theme leaf, you can create that HTML files. It's an expression language. This is the one. So finally, first of all, that client, nothing but user will request. User will request with the help of the client. That is the request. Request. Who will get that request? DispatcherServlet will get the request. After getting that request, directly it will not release the controller. It will take the help of handler mapping. Which controller has to release? Which controller has to release? It will get. So then it will call that controller. After calling that controller, the controller will release that view name. Controller? No. That controller executes particular controller. That controller, suppose getting the information and setting that information to the model. Processed information, it will set to the model. Finally, information always in model object only. After that, based on the processed information, which view has to release, it will give that view name. That information again submit to the dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet will contact the view resolver. Then view resolver will give the information. With the help of that information, it will release that view. Then what will happen? It will contact the model and it will fetch the information from the model. Finally, that view will be generated. And that final view again collected by this front controller. And finally, that information will give the response, to the client. And that response will see by the end user. Will see by the end user. This is exactly how MVC application, a web MVC application will work. Right here, what is dispatcher servlet? We need to understand. What is that web browser client? What are the types of requests? So what is controller? What is a front controller? What is handler mapping? Right? What is view resolver? Prefix and suffix of view. What model consists? What is expression language? All these things you need to understand. Okay. This is all about Spring Boot MVC architecture, and everything I'll explain with the help of one example also. Thank you all.